Hello there, and welcome back to Xpanded Universe. I'm Michael Allen Lake.
And I'm Mairead Blue.
We're continuing our season on Supergirl. This is episode 3. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the variant interpretations of her. Because as we mentioned in an earlier episode, she was taken off the board for a while, which does not say the Supergirl concept per se, or if I'm going to be snide, probably the Supergirl trademark. They want to make sure that was still in play. Not sure to
don't lose the important legal rights you have tied to the character.
Because trust me, there's a whole story about that in Captain Marvel that we'll talk about at some point. But so there were concepts of Supergirl in place. There have been variants, but when we talk about the variants, we don't just mean what happened between Crisis and Infinite Earths when the Kara Zor-El version gave her life, and then the 2004-2005 period when she was brought back. There are also other interpretations, other variants, and then other interpretations, other storyline versions. But the first one I want to talk about, and some people do not like this version of Supergirl.
And you're excited.
Oh my God, I personally adore it. I could have done a whole freaking episode on this. The Matrix Supergirl. And while Matrix Supergirl was not created by Peter David, actually briefly created in the end of the John Byrne run and going forward, it was Peter David's 80-issue Supergirl series about Matrix and Linda Lee Danvers that I just think is absolutely amazing. This is a completely different version. This was the time period where Superman was editorially mandated to be the last survivor of Krypton. So there was a Superboy, but the Superboy was actually a clone that used half of Superman's DNA and half of an Earth person's DNA. Mm-hmm. That's the Superboy you ran into sort of a couple times. Yep. So the Supergirl had to be different. Long story short, for her background, she was a protoplasmic matrix that could assume the identity of other individuals and had telekinetic abilities. This allowed her to fly, allowed her to produce telekinetic blasts, all sorts of stuff. That was her bag of tricks. Different from the standard superpowers, could help out Superman when needed, and even on a couple occasions, when people were getting too close to Superman's secret identity of Clark Kent, she would show up as Clark Kent. Or sorry, she would show up... Yeah, actually, she had to show up as Clark while he's Superman, or as Superman while he's Clark, in order to sort of help throw him off the set. She was a adjacent member of the Superman family. There were some very odd storylines, like around the time of death of Superman, she actually dated Lex Luthor briefly. The less said about that, the better. That's not what I want to talk about here. But at one point, she was always trying to figure out what her place was, what her identity was, which is an outgrowth of the fact that, as with the earlier Supergirl incarnations, creators didn't know what to do with her.
Right.
So along comes Peter David, and I still remember the tagline advertising these series in the house ads, which was, they told her to get a life, they just didn't say whose. And so she is she's involved in the situation, and there is this young lady dying in front of her, I think probably in her 20s or something like that, and she doesn't know what to do. She basically something takes over her, and she just blends her protoplasmic self with this young lady, and then they become one, they merge, and stuff starts to get very interesting, and all of a sudden her powers start to change and disappear. She starts to manifest wings of fire. She doesn't have heat vision. She shoots fire out of her eyes, various other things. Not quite sure what's going on. And several of these new supporting... And then also because this woman, she had a life. She had a parent. She was estranged from her parents in the town of Leesburg, Virginia. Well, I should say... Sorry, it's Leesburg. I sometimes think it's Leesburg, Virginia. Don't know where. But dad was a cop. Mom was there. And there was a very estranged relationship. And so now Supergirl and Linda are one person. They're not just like two minds in one body. They're one person, memories blending, personalities blending, trying to understand stuff. And it's actually, believe it or not, framed in a sort of quasi-religious standpoint. Or rather, she's not religious. Right. But all these things around, like, for instance, there's this recurring character of Wally, who's basically, he's maybe an angel, he's maybe God, he's maybe neither, I don't know. Maybe he's just a crazy-ass kid.
Okay.
There are some demons that pop up, because, comics, everybody, it happens.
Except for the 1984 movie, and it was a witch. I still can't drop that. Anyways, continue. I'm sorry.
Thankfully, that didn't happen in this case. But anyway, so Matrix becomes the Earth Angel. They expand all the continuity. They have some great supporting cast. Like, it really is this really amazing thing. But people just couldn't quite get into it. It's like the first 50 issues tells the whole sort of saga of her being in Leesburg and stuff. And it's a great little story. And it's very clear that editorial or marketing or somebody's like, okay, no. Yeah, they got to change this, or you got to cancel, you got to do something. So they go in a whole situation where this version of Supergirl, to the world, seems like she goes away, possibly dies again, they're not sure what. And then Linda steals some of the powers and becomes another Supergirl, wearing a blonde wig and wearing the outfit from the Superman, the animated series, trying to blend everything together. And then stuff keeps going back and forth and back and forth. They couldn't get a good hook. At one point, Peter David said he actually considered doing a book that had Supergirl, Power Girl, and then some other folks all together, just sort of like some sort of teen book. It was a lot of fun. It was really, really good. I'm not doing it justice the way that I talk about it. And the point, too, that even though it had to be canceled because of editorial mandate and such, he was then able, Peter David, to go on and create a creator-owned series called Fallen Angel, which basically thematically is what happened to Supergirl and Linda Lee sort of after this.
Oh, okay.
A lot of people dislike this because not a Kryptonian, not Kara Zor-El. One of the things that I like about it is it went in a completely different direction. And yes, I know there are some of the religious overtones, but it's like it's sort of left vague. Okay. There's the same superhero stuff and everything else. And Peter David has a great tongue-in-cheek style. Like, he buys these huge dramatic periods. Because, again, dealt with some issues like and death and all sorts of stuff, while still having this like really kind of just crazy back and forth aspects, great snappy pattern dialogue, and then also dealing with the fact of people going, wait, you think he's an angel? Well, maybe you need to go to the hospital and check yourself out type of stuff. So it's that vagueness you entirely had to focus on it. I suspect the way that I'm talking about it is not making anybody interested in it whatsoever, but DC Finest...
But look at his passion. I mean, he clearly developed a passion for it, so maybe you will too.
Find your passion. And if you do want to check it out, DC's Finest, which is their series of trade paperbacks, their version of the Marvel sort of epic line, they put out 2 different Superhero DC Finest collections of this time period involving Matrix. Look for them. They're all written by Peter A. David. Gary Frank did some of the initial art and did an amazing job on it. It is a completely different take. It does help if you think of it not as Supergirl, but as somebody else. But it is sort of one of my favorite versions of it, and a lot of people just do not like this because there's nothing Kryptonian about it. It's not Kara Zor-El. It's somebody else who's Supergirl. But you know what? That's the joy of comics being told over 80 plus years. You can have interpretations. You can have different impressions.
Well, and I think too, absent hearing you talk about it, well, first, it definitely would not have been the first series that I would have picked up.
Fair enough. Yes.
But I don't even know if I would have jumped to that before jumping to some of the other iterations of Supergirl that I've read. Mm-hmm. But now hearing you talk about it, I could see myself going back and reading it.
So I can't call it a standalone series because it does take place in the DC universe. So stuff when you have various crossovers that comes over, like Batman shows up in some stuff, Superman does show up in a few other things. It does exist in the greater DC universe, but it is more of a good 80 series self-contained storytelling that also sometimes even goes back and touches on some of the Silver Age stuff. As a matter of fact, I was surprised when doing research for this when I was reading the 1980. The 1982-1984 series of Supergirl, several of the names, I think by coincidence, like names of villains went on. Like there's a villain called Matrix, and she's the Matrix Supergirl. Right. There are a couple other names and such and concepts that pop up that now I realize were homaged. I mean, the Matrix one was a coincidence, but there's sort of things that were clearly Peter David was homaging stuff. He knew the history of Supergirl. He knew what people expected. Mm-hmm. He knew how to blend some of that in. I didn't pick it up at the time because I didn't know that. That's just another example of just his incredible writing. Right. Now this is where it gets interesting. That's a very completely different variant of Supergirl in the sense it was Supergirl, mm-hmm. but not Kara. However, there's also another popular one that, and when in an earlier episode we talked about how we hosted a trivia competition at AwesomeCon 2026 called Summer on Krypton, and I remember because we had one question about is this Supergirl? And we showed a picture of Power Girl. I'll explain this in a second. You haven't missed anything. Picture of Power Girl, and we said no, it's not Supergirl, and some of the audience got very upset. Mm-hmm. Because technically speaking...
Well, they did. They screamed out. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was vocal. There was no raising of hands. It was just raising your voice and throwing out your opinion, which was fine. We thought it was great. But they definitely had a stance.
And our thing is, it was not Supergirl because it was identified by the publisher as Power Girl. However, why the person said this, because that is supposed to Kara Zor-El. Right. Power Girl is Kara Zor-El. Now...
Pronounced differently if you didn't quite pick up on that.
And I may not have pronounced that properly, but basically the difference in spelling is Supergirl's last name is E-L and Power Girl's last name is L. Because I don't know if we've ever discussed this, the Golden Age Superman was Kal-El, literally just L. And when they was rebooted for the Silver Age, E-L was added to it.
Got it.
So since Power Girl was actually designed as the cousin of the Earth 1 Golden Age Superman, mm-hmm. her name is something like that. Same thing, cousin, Father was Zor, all sorts of stuff. Interesting enough, Power Girl came about after Supergirl. So Power Girl is technically a variant of Supergirl, but she existed on a parallel Earth, Earth-2, which was the one that had held all of the Golden Age versions of the heroes and such. Now she, despite being called Girl, because we got Power Girl, Supergirl, was much more, I mean, she'd be called Power Woman in probably contemporary stuff. She was much more of an adult. I think she was still supposed to be young adult in maybe like the 20s stuff like that, but not necessarily a teenager. She was done as a different character. She was confident. She was physically drawn differently.
Yes.
Her costume was different. It was a slight. You can argue, you can see the similarities between her and Supergirl or her and Superman, but it did not look like a complete ripoff of the typical super costume.
Yes.
The way you were smiling, I don't know if you want to talk about one of the other big variations.
So I came across Power Girl, while reading some of the most recent, really the 2004 to 2011 series, which meant that I was just dropped into her character. I did not know the backstory. I knew that she existed. As the issues move forward, you learn that she's Supergirl's cousin, and then there is a character that says, "Oh, I bet you all are sisters," which, as Michael pointed out, their father is the same, just different worlds. But because I had never read these before, I didn't realize how many times characters in the comics would comment on her bust size. So when I saw Michael later, I told him, I said, it's somewhat surprising how hyper-focused every character is on the size of her breasts. I mean, if maybe one character mentions one time that she looks slightly more mature, which is a word that they use in the comics and in the cartoons. We were watching a cartoon episode in preparation for our own podcast episode. And in the cartoon series, in this particular episode, they mention, "Oh, wow, that looks like Supergirl. But she looks much more mature." And I'm thinking, how many times
it's such
are
a
we going
coded
to
version
mention this?
Now, we're not trying to say, "Oh, hey, this one looks like this one looks like she's dressed for high school, and this one looks like she's dressed for a board meeting." That's not the mature they're talking about. It's like the fact they take it and they code it that way. I'm like, oh.
And in the comic books, it's not coded. I mean, in the comic books, the characters flat out say, well, definitely not flat out, but they admit that the breasts are larger. And again, one time I could say, all right, that's a cheeky comment. I get it. But the multiple times,
it turns into a running gag.
It is, yeah.
Now, and let's over to the fandom too, because I quite frankly, and based on what we just said, I don't. Some people have certain opinions about this, but quite frankly, I prefer Power Girl to Supergirl. And when I said that, some people are like, "Oh, I bet you do." I'm like, no, because the character and the difference, because of what they've gone through. Because part of it too is because Power Girl has technically lost her world twice. So she lost Krypton, and then after Crisis on Infinite Earths, she lost her Earth. And is on a whole new Earth, so she's doing that, and so she's got much. I mean, she's not perfect. She's definitely has some personality issues to work through, but she is dynamic. She is headstrong. She is whatever, and she still needs to process her trauma. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
But it's like it's a very different character than the Supergirl one. The problem is that when I say that, people are like, "Oh," and I'm like, no, because like it's her approach to everything. That is just absolutely phenomenal. Like, matter of fact, there was a Amanda Conner, Jimmy Palmiotti. Was it Jimmy Palmiotti who wrote it? But anyway, there was after Infinite Crisis, there was a Power Girl series that was just absolutely wonderful about that. And one of the running jokes in that is the fact that that she'd be talking to somebody, villain, hero, person on the street, and again they're just like, "Oh my god, stop that," Well, she says stuff that sometimes she feels like, but it works well in the fight to distract people. So they work it into that, but it's like. Sorry, even I got distracted by this whole discussion there. Let me back up.
Who says he's not paying attention, folks?
So I'll say is this series, beautifully written series. Really enjoy it. Very much done. There has been a later series since then that was been done in the last couple of years. I should probably give that a try as well. But it's like, I like Power Girl because she is just a very different character. But she is still, unfortunately, in Supergirl's shadow. Even when Supergirl was not around for that time period between Crisis and Infinite Earths until the stuff that you read, people looked at Power Girl and were like, basically Supergirl.
Which I do find to be interesting, because having found Power Girl in the middle of her, well, I'm viewing it as the middle of her creation, but at a time when she had already been developed, I actually didn't view her as Supergirl, even though I learned that they were cousins, and well, they were both cousins of Superman, possibly sisters.
They consider themselves cousins to some degree.
Yeah, I think they use the word cousins more frequently. I've noticed than they do sisters, I do think the writers did a good enough job discriminating between the two of them so that I truly never felt they were the same character. Though I learned the backstory.
And this thing, I will say that I've only read a few stories of these, but there's a gentleman. I want to say it was written by Philip Kennedy Johnson, the creator that you met at AwesomeCon.
Yes.
I want to say he's one that's worked on this. Where recently they created like the whole sort of Superman family, brought them all together. They'll have matching jackets. I'm not kidding about that. And they've got Supergirl and Power Girl both in there, and they're trying to also. I think the writers and creators using that to define, hey, what is the difference between them? Because there's a little bit of even friction there. Like they're trying to get along, but it's like, is this a duplicate power set? What's happening? Is duplicate personality? Because there is some differences, but when they've streamlined the look so that nobody has capes, they're all wearing jackets with the S symbol on it, they look even sometimes. They can potentially look more alike, unless you're paying attention to the color scheme.
Well, and there is a series of Supergirl where they cut all of her hair off. Which, sorry, not all of her hair, but they give her a short bob that is similar to Power Girl's bob. And I think in that moment, they do. And I know it's just the hair, but if you watch the way that Supergirl's hair is drawn, even when she's around characters like Stargirl, sorry. See, that's why I'm still a novice. Stargirl has long, straight blonde hair. Supergirl has long but wavy blonde hair, and that's how they draw her. They always draw her, and her hair is sort of off in the wind, and it has some waves, where Stargirl is very straight. But once they shortened Supergirl's hair into a bob, she looks much more similar to Power Girl.
It's interesting about that. But we said, so that's part of the difference between the two Karas. The one who is Power Girl and the one who is Supergirl. But at the same time, as I said, as you touched on this earlier, there have been different interpretations of Supergirl all along. And so I want to go back to what you were saying about the one that you really got familiar with, which is in the 2004-2005 one. Mm-hmm. There was, and I'm going to reference a couple publishing events you have not heard about before. Okay. To sort of, hopefully, kind of go with me. We'll include little references to them in the write-up down below, or I suspect people in the comments will be able to explain them fairly well as well. So Supergirl came back.
Yes.
There was a major event called Infinite Crisis that relaunched a bunch of stuff, and I think I talked about that 1 year later thing with you. Yes. Where it's like that's where they wound up in Candor briefly and all sorts of stuff. So that went forward for a while. Then DC did something called the New 52, where for reasons that boggle the mind, they basically did not even a hard read. They attempted a half-hard reboot of their entire line. Mm-hmm. Meaning that if the books are selling well, they could basically keep with the same story and everything else got rebooted, just like after Crisis on Infinite Earths. Which led to a great deal of confusion in some stuff. Like, for instance, Green Lantern stories, still 90% the same because they were selling well. Batman, 90% the same because they were selling well. Wonder Woman, started from scratch. Superman started over from scratch, all sorts of stuff. So they came up with a completely new version of Kara Zor-El. And I know you've encountered her in some of the other stuff you've read. Yes. Where this one, called by some people the New 52 version, other people the Angry Survivor. So they really doubled down on the concept of like her as a survivor, everything she'd seen, everything she was kind of processing, and it was a very different approach from Superman. And also, if I recall, I didn't read a lot of the early ones, and the early Supergirl of the New 52, but she didn't necessarily view humans as friends or somebody I should sort of be a part of. She viewed it as like, I'm stuck here, maybe I'm supposed to be with my cousin, maybe I'm not, but just was not a huge fan of this. And in the process of that, so she sort of was like, the whole sort of bull in a china shop type of thing going around, ran up with, various conspiracy theories, ran into various aliens here and there. And then there's a series that has sort of been talked about quite a bit that people like, and I know you went ahead and read that, called Rage of the Red Lanterns.
Yes.
So as a quick side note, many of you have probably heard of Green Lanterns. At one point in the early 21st century, they expanded the emotional spectrum. So Green Lanterns use will. There are people like Blue Lanterns who are the power of hope. Red Lanterns focus the power of rage. Mm-hmm. They have a red ring. There's several other things they do. Like sometimes they actually produce this red acidic vomit, for lack of a better phrase. They're consumed by rage, and that's what sort of leaves them. And in this process, I believe, Supergirl somehow became a Red Lantern. Is that
right? So a whole bunch of red rings are sent out to the universe to find their new, would you call it a host?
That's a good question. In the case of the red rings, because they sort of take over, could be a host. I was going to argue with bearer or like companion or something. Usually they call them the ring bearers, whether it's the Green Lantern ring, the Orange Lantern ring, or the Red Lantern ring. But it is a kind of a host because they attach to somebody who is consumed with rage and pain, and then sort of.
Well, and if you take it off, you die.
Yes, take it off, you die.
So
in that case, yeah, I like your word host. Sorry, that was a bit of a bit of a tangent because tangent time. But I think host is a good word for it.
So the ring finds her, and she's in this angry state. Now, one of the reasons why I liked this series in particular is because I am not, no surprise, wholly familiar with any of the lanterns, red, green, blue, etc. And I had only experienced the Guy Gardner Green Lantern from the most recent Superman. And when you start this series, he's just there, but he's red, and he has a beard, one of those
beard mustache,
beard.
He actually looks better with the bowl cut that he has.
He does.
Kevin McGuire and Nathan Fillion and stuff.
He looks much better with the bowl cut, which is a stretch because the bowl cut is not attractive. At least to me, it's not attractive. So I found it to be interesting because while your typical Red Lantern can just let rage and anger fill them, and they're just pure evil. I mean, they don't listen.
They're kind of mindless. Yeah,
they just destroy everything. What Guy Gardner and his group of Red Lanterns have found is if you go into this lake of blood, and you don't know how long it will take you to be in this lake, but the blood will somewhat cleanse you. As I mentioned earlier, you can't take off the ring, well, at least at the moment, in the moment and time in this particular comic, you think you can't take off the ring or you'll die. So it doesn't make you perfect, it doesn't make you a Green Lantern, but it allows you to have this sense of personal thought and decision-making ability, so you can determine whether or not you want to take certain actions. But I enjoyed it because it deals with Kara's rage in a way that I thought was healthy and exploratory of her character without making it. Michael briefly referenced it in his overview of the character. There is a point in time where Kara's two personalities are split, and so the good Kara looks like the Kara that you're used to seeing. The rage-filled Kara, now her outfit is black and silver, and she just wants to hurt everyone. They end up coming back together, but there's no real exploration of the black and silver character. You just know that she's angry. Whereas in the Red Lantern version of Kara, you really see her go through every step of why do I feel this way. She revisits her memories of her parents, the last memories that she has of her parents. She goes back and she finds her roommate, Siobhan, who was the first person she found in Queens she could actually live with. And Siobhan wasn't afraid of her powers. Now what you learn later is that Siobhan is also the Banshee.
Silver Banshee.
Sorry, Silver Banshee. So there are other aspects to her character that make it such that she can get along with Supergirl. But I thought it was a really well-developed character. I thought they handled her backstory well. It is different than the way that her backstory is handled in Women of Tomorrow. But there are still some overlapping highlights between the two. So I thought I was actually quite happy that I read the Red Lantern one prior to reading Women of Tomorrow, because I think it made me understand the way they handled it in Women of Tomorrow, but also helped me tie in the previous iterations of Supergirl's sense of rage and anger. I enjoyed it.
And you also touch, I mean, in a roundabout way, you're sort of also touching on that sort of both the fun and the frustration with continuity sometimes. As we've said several times, these characters have been around for decades. You've had multiple creators doing multiple interpretations such on them. And so, but because you read the Angry Survivor version first, it helps you appreciate the Woman of Tomorrow version.
It entirely did.
But what's interesting to me is, so at some point, probably shortly after the Rage of the Red Lantern one, there was another company-wide sort of reset for reasons that not worth going into this point. It was called DC Rebirth.
But even you and I, even if you know something about it, we probably know very little of the actual behind the scenes.
But in that case, they rebooted the character of Supergirl almost completely. The Angry Survivor version was gone, as was that whole sort of onesie thing she was wearing with the funky boots.
Yes.
And how much of that, and this is what I don't know, it'd be interesting to look at and research at some point, this also coincided with after the Supergirl TV show had started. So how much of that was because people were reacting. Oh, sorry, I should back up. They reverted Kara to a much more positive version, a much more
Yes.
version. And so, how much that was a reaction to how the TV show was received? How much that was to people going, the angry stuff isn't really working, so let's try something else? How much it was just a creator going, can I try this in this kind of a new pitch? Unlike the New 52, it was a complete reset line wide. Rebirth is sort of even softer reset and even more confusing. So I'll be honest with you, a lot of that time period between 2011 to 2016, I was kind of going, yeah. And just kind of pick stuff. But it did not invalidate what came before. And I think, to your point, you see that in Woman of Tomorrow.
Yes.
And that is a sort of interesting take. And like why they brought back something that may be closer to that. Now, I think the success of Woman of Tomorrow and the movie is going to bring more of sort of that frustration and trauma processing back into the main character because people are kind of reacting to that.
I also think, too, now that we've discussed in various episodes how none of these stories, the comics, the TV shows, the movies, are standalone because the success or failure of one genre impacts the success or failure of a second genre. And so when you talk about the Supergirl television show that was on the CW, yes, that's very much a kinder, softer, you go back to the Kara Zor-El that people think of, she's just there fighting along Superman. I shouldn't say just there, but she's there fighting alongside Superman. I think that worked really well to get people back in the game, to gain their interest again. What I'm seeing now as time has gone on, not just with her character, but if any of you all watch the Marvel episodes of Daredevil and Punisher, you'll see that.
Yes, we are crossing the streams or invoking Marvel when we talk about
Sorry,
DC.
I know.
But that's that's okay because we're ecumenical and we like this stuff. Sorry, you were saying.
You can see how they go dark, especially as the seasons go on, and I like that. I think the audience likes that, and they're there for that. And so one of the other reasons, having read Woman of Tomorrow, but then reading it in anticipation of the new movie, I'm excited to see the new movie because I think this new movie is going to be darker. They know that their audience doesn't need the introduction anymore. They don't need to see the softest version of Kara that you will see. They know who she is. They know her underlying struggle, and they want to see how that plays out in the theater. So I'm excited.
I love that, and I also think that is a good point to bring this stage of the conversation to an end, to wrap that up. I will say that because we're going to have at least one more episode of the season where we talk about Supergirl, and one of the things that remind me to make sure we touch base on is Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow.
Yes.
And part of the reason why I want to touch on that is because there actually is a Superwoman character who's completely different from a Supergirl. Because you kind of think at some point, why are they still calling her Supergirl when Woman of Tomorrow? Because Superwoman's something different. That's probably for some of our conversation in episode 4, along with a few other aspects as well. But once again, I want to say thank you for coming with us to have this conversation, to expand this universe, and hopefully you are finding ways to not just get deeper into this fandom, but also determining your own paths to discovering what you like about these characters, which version of the character you would like. There is, as we talked about, many different things you can pick from, whether it's the Matrix version, the Woman of Tomorrow, the classic one, the Angry Survivor. There's so many different stories you could pick that might resonate with you and that you might really, really enjoy. And then, speaking of that, because we talked about Angry Survivor, there is a lot of stuff. Dealing with the world is very difficult, and sometimes we need to just be reminded we're not alone, and we're not the only one. And you're not alone. You're not the only one. Make sure to take time to give yourself grace. Make sure to take time to give yourself some space. That's not intended to rhyme, but it does. But you need to realize that if you're here and you're surviving, that counts as a victory. Don't ever downplay that. Thank you very much. We hope you come back for our next episode. Once again, I am Michael Allen Lake.
And I'm Mairead Blue.
And we've been expanding each other's, and hopefully yours, universes.